Hi, everybody. Welcome to Exegetically Speaking, a podcast of the friends and faculty of Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois, and the Lanier Theological Library. My name is David Capes, and I'm the Senior Research Fellow at the Lanier Library, former faculty member up at Wheaton College. Our purpose in these podcasts is fairly simple. We want to promote the study of biblical languages, Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic, so that we can read the Bible more faithfully, study it more fully, and not just read it and study it, but also to live it. Our guest today is Dr. Phillip Marshall, Ph.D., Assistant Professor of Biblical Languages in the School of Christian Thought at Houston Baptist University. Phillip, thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
Now, your specialty is Hebrew or Greek, or you do both? I mean, I know Emma, who's sitting here, both languages for her.
That's right. I'm teaching her both Greek and Hebrew. So I do work in both languages, did my doctoral work in Septuagint studies. So I had to master both of them as well as one could.
Yeah.
But a lot of students ask me, which language do you like more, Greek or Hebrew? And I tell them it's like asking, we literally have twins. Which twin do you like more? And it's really hard to answer that question.
It is hard, isn't it?
In fact, you shouldn't answer that question.
You probably shouldn't. No. It's bad for the self-image of the other twin at that point. But anyway, you and I have taught together at Houston Baptist University a number of years back.
Right.
And you've just done a great job, an excellent job over the years there. And today we're going to talk about 2 Samuel.
That's
so we're
right.
going to be in the Hebrew today.
Yes,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and the story of David and Bathsheba.
That's right.
And I love that line from the book of Matthew where it says that David fathered Solomon through the wife of Uriah, right? Which is just so much scandal.
Yes.
I mean, it's like he just brings it in, you know. He could have ignored that, you know, he could have forgot about that. But in fact, no, he sort of punctuates that. And he said, this is how the Messiah got here.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So what about that story garners your attention?
Yeah, well, it's interesting as, you know, the podcast's purpose is to try to demonstrate why reading the original language is actually as helpful to understanding the text better, right? And so some of the things that I noticed as I was reading through this passage, they don't necessarily change anything in terms of theology. It's no earth-shattering theological difference, but it adds some texture to the reading that I think really just delights the reader. And helps you see how poignant the matters are that Nathan and David are facing in the aftermath.
Yeah.
So, if I could, I think everybody knows the story of David and Bathsheba. You know, he's hanging out. It's time for war, and Bathsheba's bathing on her roof, and he catches her, or she catches his eye, I guess, and so he sends for her, and she comes, and they have a child. When all of that plays out and Uriah ends up being killed, in a sense, by David's hand, David comes and he utters his rebuke or Nathan comes and utters his rebuke to David through a parable. And so if we have a minute, I'll read
absolutely.
the parable, and I want to park on just one or two of the verses here.
Okay.
So in 2 Samuel 12, it says, "And the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, There were 2 men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. And he brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink with his cup and lie in his arms, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man who was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man, and he said to Nathan, As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." What I find interesting about this text, and I just happened to be reading it devotionally in Hebrew one day, probably about a year and a half ago, and certain words just jumped out at me that, having read this story and having heard it in the English Bible so many times, I had just never read it in Hebrew. And I was shocked. Shocked. So let me just show you some of the wonderful treasures from the Hebrew text.
Good.
In 2 Samuel 12:3, at the end of it, this is Nathan's description of the poor man. He used to, the ewe lamb used to eat of his morsel, drink from his cup, and then lie in his arms. And it was like a daughter to him. Now think about that word lie here. This is the Hebrew verb shakav. And interestingly, it occurs earlier in the narrative Chapter 11 is the historical report of David's adultery with Bathsheba. Chapter 12 is basically the parabolic retelling. Okay, so you're going to see words here in the parable that go backwards and also go forwards from Nathan's parable. So here in the backward view, shakav is used in chapter 11, verse 4, where it describes David as sending messengers to her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. So here, the ewe lamb is on very intimate terms with the poor man, lays with the poor man, in a sense. So this is Uriah, of course, right, who's intimate with his own wife, and yet here David is taking that prerogative upon himself with Bathsheba, who doesn't belong to him.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Wow.
Secondly, it says there that he lay in, if we're back to chapter 12, verse 3, that the lamb would lay in his arms. And this is the Hebrew word chek. And some translations translate this as bosom. So it would lay in his bosom. The ewe lamb would do that. And interestingly, after Nathan uncovers the fact that David is the man, it says this. This is 2 Samuel 12:8. Nathan says, speaking on behalf of God, and I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms. This is the same Hebrew word, into your bosom, into your chek, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that were too little, I would add to you as much more. And what Nathan is basically saying is, look, I even gave you women into your bosom. You had plenty, David. Why did you have to take the ewe lamb who would lie in the chek, in the bosom of another man? Very poignant. And then in 2 Samuel 12:4, it says this. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flock or herd, but he took the poor man's lamb. And it's that word take that's captivating. This rich man was unwilling to take something that belonged to himself, and so he took what belonged to someone else. And we see that word in chapter 11, verse 4. So David sent messengers and took her.
Wow.
And she came to him, and he lay with her.
Wow.
So there's three, but here's the whiz-banger of them all. The last description of the ewe lamb, it says that it was like a daughter to him. And the Hebrew expression is like, preposition is k, and then the next word is daughter. Hebrew word for daughter is bath, kavath. The ewe lamb was like a daughter, was like a bath. And, well, Bathsheba was literally a Bathsheba. To Uriah, right? And yet this rich man takes this one who was like a bath and like a daughter and uses it for his own purposes, exploits it for his
Interesting kind of connections with these, both looking back,
right,
but also looking forward.
Exactly.
Strikes me that, and I had a rabbi tell me one time that David violated 9 out of the 10 commandments. And there's 3 of them here. There's murder, right? And there's taking, which is stealing, and there's also adultery. So you got 3 commandments right there.
That's right. That's right. And Solomon seemed to have the commandments in hand and was just checking them off too, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
The apple doesn't far fall from the tree.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Well, reading the text richly like you do, I mean, sometimes you do it in devotional ways. It's not like you're just preparing for a class, right? So you read Hebrew in devotion, read Greek in devotion as well, but you see things, you hear things, you experience things that you cannot do and understand in any other way.
Exactly. And there's something to be said about reading devotionally where you're not just reading little isolated verses here or there, but reading longer stretches of text, because drawing those linguistic connections in terms of the vocabulary, you won't catch those.
Yeah, you can't do that in one reading, can you?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thanks so much for being with us today.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks as well to Silvio Vasquez, Rebecca Larson for helping us edit and produce the podcast. Thanks as well to Phil Keggy for our music. If you have questions or comments you'd like to be in touch about the podcast, please do so at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks for listening.